Good morning and greetings in Jesus' name this morning. For the sermon this morning, I wanted to continue talking about discipleship and some of the disciplines of discipleship. And I basically am looking at three. We talked about generosity the last time. And this Sunday, I would like to look at service and then maybe spend another sermon on witnessing. And I was as I was thinking about those three, there's a lot of interchange between the three of those points: generosity, service, and witnessing. They all kind of work together. And so there's going to be some overlap as I talk about service, generosity, and witnessing. Some of the comments that were made here in the announcements, I thought about how witnessing, when we're practicing service, we're often witnessing as well, even though we might not be saying, trying to lead somebody to Christ through our words. Our actions are a form of witnessing as well, and generosity is a way of witnessing, and it's an act of service. And so all of these interlap and go over each other, but I think we can see three distinct actions here too, with generosity, service, and witnessing. And so, again, if you're a disciple of Jesus, your goal and my goal is to grow and mature into the kind of person that's going to say and do the things that Jesus did. And so as we think about that, we have to ask ourselves, what is a disciple, and what does it look like for me to be a disciple of Jesus, a follower of the master, but generally the definition of disciple is follower of a master of some kind. And again, that brings up the question, well, what did Jesus do? And we can look at the many different things he did while he was on earth, but specifically thinking about this topic about service, we can see that Jesus' life was one of service like nobody else. Again, he was God come to earth, and he didn't need to serve the people that he was serving. He was here on earth as a king, and he was tempted with that to take that power and become a ruler over the earth, in the earth, and he chose not to, but instead he chose to become a servant and live his life as a servant to all those around him. So today we want to look at that topic. I think I would define this service as giving of yourself to meet the needs of other people, and doing it in the name of honoring Christ. But as we think about serving, it's giving of yourself to meet mostly physical needs, but can be mental and spiritual needs as well, as we think about how we define this. A Jewish historian, he described a disciple like this. He says, the disciple sought to be a humble and comparing companion, doing personal acts of service and helping the teacher in all things. And that's how this Jewish historian talked about the disciples that would have followed other rabbis during the time of Jesus, as someone who sought to be humble and did personal acts of service and helping the teacher in all things. And so the teacher was the rabbi. And many of us would think that it would not at all be a burden to personally be able to be of service to Jesus. If he was here on earth, I'm sure none of us would say, well, that would be a big burden to have to follow Jesus and look after his needs and follow him personally. Or even if we think about somebody that we really admire being somebody that serves somebody like that, we might be glad to have that opportunity. But Jesus, again, is not asking to be served. He's asking us to be servants, and he said that he himself was a servant as well. So while we can't serve Jesus personally like the disciples did, today as his disciples, we are serving Jesus personally every time we do acts of service in his name. And so whenever we do acts of service in Jesus' name, it's like we're serving Jesus personally just as much as his disciples did when he was on earth. And I think that can be an encouragement to each of us as we times weigh the cost of service to other people and what it takes of our time and our resources. And Jesus' life was one of service to others. He often went out of his way to speak to the people and heal those who were at the margins of society. It was the tax collectors and the lepers and the Samaritans and women and children. Those were the people he often was speaking to. And he said of himself in Matthew 20:28, he said, the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life a ransom for many. And I think that one sentence there is just the best summary we have of what Jesus described his life of service. He did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life a ransom for many. And so if we want to be disciples of Jesus, we also need to be practicing serving other people, serving others and meeting their needs in the best way that we can as Christians. But, and that's something that right away comes up, we would all have to admit that our default setting is that we would rather have people serving us rather than wanting to serve other people. And I think each of us, that old man, the inner spirit of self, wants to be served. It doesn't want to be serving other people. It wants people to come and bow down to us and meet our needs, not we meet the needs of other people. But, can you imagine what the world would be like if all those who claimed to be Christians actually served each other in the way that Jesus served and helped those who were in need? We have so many problems in our society, and just looking at our society, there's many other problems in the world too, but with broken homes and immorality and loneliness and hatred, crime, political polarization. I just saw somebody said that our society is more divided now than it has been at any time since the Civil War, where people are just at odds with each other, and there's a lot of hate on many different levels. And there's so many problems that we can kind of get overwhelmed and say, well, how can we possibly heal all these wounds? And I think the answer is that me individually, I can't do it, but each of us can do something by committing acts of service that helps in these problem areas. The world says it's through political policy, through making the right laws, and through enforcing laws. So can we fix people by getting the right laws in place? And that's about the only answer the world has, is try to make more laws and try to enforce the laws. But if laws could truly fix the problems of our society, we would probably be living in a paradise right now, because we have made plenty of laws to try to stop these things, but yet they continue on because they're not getting to the root of the problem, what is really causing it. And so the laws only control the problems to a certain level. And a lot of these problems can only be solved one problem at a time when Christians reach out in love to assist and to connect with people and to reconcile with people. In other words, by serving other people. That's how these needs can truly be met and how hearts can be changed. And these huge problems that we have can start to be turned over to Christ and let him resolve them. There's different ways we can do that, and we'll think about more as we go along here, but yet somebody had a list here like befriending the poor, the homeless in your city, and I just heard a statistic that Lancaster right now has about 300 homeless people in the city, and there's about rooms for about 80 in the homes that they have open now. One of them closed, has recently reopened. Helping refugee families, volunteering at homeless shelters, helping with child care for people in need, visiting lonely people, caring for your aging parents. There's just so many things that as we look and we're open to the needs around us, that we can serve as Christians. And every day is full of opportunities to follow Jesus' example and give our life in service in many different ways. Some of these are people right in their own church, and they're also people outside of the church. This encompasses everything. And we know that one of the last things in the life of Jesus is he was with his disciples, where we practice feet washing, and I'm glad that we do that as a church. I think it's a true connection to that spirit of service that many churches are missing today. But how Jesus said, I have set this example that you should do as I have done unto you. And he took the garb of a servant, the clothing of a servant, and he knelt and washed his disciples' feet. And he said, now that you have known these things, you will be blessed if you do them. And that's again, another commandment, another encouragement to us as we think about practicing service, is that we will be blessed when we do that. And so the question is, do you want to be blessed this morning? And I think that as we think about service, each one of us wants that, but there's always the challenges to being able to do that. 1 Thessalonians 5:12, and you can turn there. We'll read a couple of verses there in 1 Thessalonians. 1 Thessalonians 5:12 through 14. This is talking probably more directed towards people in the church, but I think we can also get some lessons about how this works as we think about service as well. And we beseech you, brethren, to know them which labor among you and are over you in the Lord and admonish you, and to esteem them very, very highly in love for their work's sake, and be at peace among yourselves. Now we exhort you, brethren, warn them that are unruly, comfort the feeble-minded, support the weak, be patient towards all men. And especially want to look at verse 14 there and just pull a few thoughts out of that verse. That series of commandments there, the ESV says, admonish the idle, encourage the faint-hearted, help the weak, be patient with them all. And those are four aspects of committing service to other people, of doing that are often a challenge. I was also, as I read these, I was struck by how it talks about this in terms of work or labor. In other words, this is not the way that you become healthy, wealthy, and wise, is by doing acts of service. It's hard work. It's not just something that happens and we don't have to do anything about it. It's just acts of service happen. It takes discipline and it takes a conscious effort to go out and do these things. It takes our time and our resources. So those 4 points there: admonish the idle or the unruly, encourage the faint-hearted, help the weak, and be patient with them all. These verses are directed at people in the church, but I think they're also very fitting as we think about serving other people as well. You'll often find when you're serving that you're dealing with several types of people. It may be the socially impaired, the mentally or emotionally impaired, or the physically impaired people, or a combination of all three of those as we're dealing with people that are needy. You'll often see those three aspects coming up. And as we think about these 4 points, admonish the idle or the unruly is the other definition of that. When we're dealing with people that are on the fringes of society, maybe talking about the homeless or people like that, you'll often find that they will blame others for their problems. They'll often try to shift blame and act like everything is against them. And sometimes the best thing that you can do in those cases is to help them to see their own responsibility in where they are and why they are where they are. Sometimes the best thing you can do for them is to give practical advice on how to handle life. Often that's, from my own personal experience, that's part of the problem, is people that are on the fringes of society don't really know what to do next. They don't have a good grasp of a lot of the practical things that we grew up with in our homes, how to handle finances, just how to make good decisions that'll make you more successful in life. Those decisions, often people don't know how to make it, or they need somebody to help them to make that decision. And often it's only possible, though, to give that admonition after you have a relationship and a trust built up. If you think you can go into a homeless camp and start telling people how to get their life in shape, you're not going to get anywhere. It has to be something that they've developed a relationship with you, you've developed it with them, and there's trust built up. And at that point, you can begin to actually speak into their life and give them help in meaningful ways. And again, first of all, if you can lead them to Christ, but some of them would claim to be Christians as well already, and so you may be past that point, but yet it's very obvious that there's problems that are still there that are causing them to be in the situation, and often somebody that just cares enough to stand beside them and help them out is what they need more than physical goods or food or things like that. It made me think of a time that on street meetings in Chicago, we would go to Pacific Garden Mission and share a message there, and the homeless people came in there and they had to sit through the sermon to get the food, and so it was a good time to sleep. And one of the ministers that came to share that day, he was preaching along, and all of a sudden he got kind of fed up, I guess, and he said, "Y'all are just sitting there like bumps on a log." And he kind of tore into him, and I heard a bunch of mumbling, and they kind of booed him, and I don't think that approach worked at all as far as reaching out to those people and trying to connect with them. But sometimes that's kind of how we feel like dealing with people that are at the margins of society, the poor and the homeless, like, why don't you just get your act together and figure things out here? It can kind of bring that out in us. But again, it takes a lot of patience and a lot of time and trust and effort to get to the place where you can really speak into people's life. So admonishing the idle, encourage the faint-hearted, and if we are called to serve as an encourager to the sufferer, we're all called to that, but maybe different times you have the opportunity more than others. Maybe just one point on this is that remember that when people are in a time of crisis or trauma, just being around is often very valuable in those cases. And probably more valuable, just your presence being there is more valuable than your words of wisdom, as wise as they may be. Often people that are in a situation, I'm sure many of you have experienced this as well, you've already thought through all the pat answers to the problem that they're having. And usually the help that people give really is stuff that you've already worked through. But just being willing to go and be with somebody does say a lot. And again, resist the urge to do all the talking, but take time to listen. It's often easy to try to fill the silence by just talking, but giving time for people to talk is very important as we think about encouraging the faint-hearted. And again, that's a time to remind people of God's presence. It doesn't have to be a lot of flowery words, but some verses, and just helping people, encouraging them that God is still here no matter what they're going through. And then being able to provide practical support as well, which I think we do really well with as a church, and being able to help in that way as well, give our resources and food and whatever else we can. Helping the weak is the third one, and there is a time to offer financial help, labor, work, helping around the house, things like that. And the weak that's talking about here may be the widows and orphans. Those are often the two groups that the Bible singles out as people that need help. But it may also be generally the elderly and any one of us who will at some time in our life face physical setbacks, whether it's from sickness or injury. We're going to need to be in those shoes too, where we're going to need to be receiving help or being willing to receive it. And so for each of us, when we're doing well, it's the time to be supporting the people that are not. And so we help the weak by supporting them through acts of service like taking a meal, mowing their grass, cleaning the house for somebody, all these really practical things that I think, do very well in doing. And so I'm not saying this is trying to scold or whatever, but it's ways that we help those who are in need or help the weak in their time of need. But it shouldn't only be for people in the church. I think if we are aware of what's going on around us with our neighbors and community needs, those same things are very meaningful when we apply them to our neighbors in their time of need as well, or offer assistance however we can. And I think that's the key is, am I aware of the needs around me? And I say this because I often fail in this, in that I am not aware enough about the needs of those around me. We came back from a walk the one evening, and my neighbor was being loaded up in the ambulance, and I didn't know what was going on. I knew that they're older, and of course it wasn't the time to try to get a lot of information as they were just loading him into the ambulance. But Thelma went over then and talked to her and found out a little bit more what was going on. But I didn't really know that there was any problem going on at the time because I'm not that connected to them. But sometimes if you see an ambulance in front of your neighbor, you can't really ignore that. And so I think sometimes God places things there in front of you that you can't really help but say, I need to pay attention to what's going on here. And so sometimes we need to pray and ask God to help us to see the needs of those around us. If we feel like we're not, is that something that we're thinking about, that we're praying and asking God to help us to see those needs and to present them before us so we have an opportunity to practice helping the weak. And then it sums up by being patient with them all. Service often requires a lot of patience, and sometimes the things we do are not going to be received with thankfulness, or at least not the thankfulness that we think we deserve for doing them. there's always that thing of wanting to be served, but then sometimes there's still the sense of self that arises when we do serve, and then we still want to get quite a bit of recognition for that, or at least the recognition that we deserve for what we did. And again, that's a natural inclination that all of us face, is we want to be honored for doing something good. But sometimes that isn't going to happen, and sometimes people actually do the opposite. They'll curse you or whatever for doing something that you thought was an act of service. And so sometimes we have to, in those times, be willing to be patient and long-suffering. But I think that we need to keep it foremost in our minds what the reason for our service is, and that if we keep that there as, why am I doing this? What is the reason for my service? Again, it's to serve Jesus and to receive, and whether we receive honor or not, whether people congratulate us or give us compliments, we're still being the disciple of Christ when we serve. And again, we're not doing it necessarily for the other people, we're doing it because of Christ, because of what he did for us. And so that's the root cause or the root reason why we're doing this. And there's another thing that comes through as we help other people and we practice this, is not only does this practice of service have the potential to help people in our broken world, but it also has the power to heal us as well. And I think if you've had experience with helping people in certain situations, whether it's homeless people or refugees or people that are outside of our context but are in need, and we go out and actually interact with them in acts of service, you learn a lot about yourself and about them by doing that, and you learn maybe some problems with my own life. A list that somebody said is you're being set free of your ego, your entitlement, and your self-obsession. And I think that's one thing that we often see as we help other people, especially on the fringes of society, is we kind of get a check on our entitlement. We realize we take a lot of things for granted that other people don't have. And it's just one of the things that comes with service, is we begin to understand there's no easy answers to a lot of these problems. It's not so simple as just, well, there's jobs available, so why don't you go get a job, and that's case closed. It's not that simple, and you start to realize that these things are more complex, and they're going to take a lot more effort than the pat answers we often have before we actually start to work with people in their situations. When we serve in the way of Jesus, those lines between the servant and the served and the giver and the recipient all kind of start to blur together, and we both end up getting something from that. And I think that if we're doing it with a true Christian spirit, that's what's going to come out of it, is we're giving, but yet, in a sense, we're also receiving as we do acts of service. And so there's, I'm sure different ones of you have had that experience of learning by doing acts of service with people in different groups, that you learn a lot about yourself as well, and about the situation that you didn't realize before you actually were able to help in those places. One other, maybe here in the final half here, looking at how to practice service, let's turn to Matthew 25 and think about these verses here, the final judgment. Probably some of you could recite these, they're pretty well known, but we're going to read Matthew 25 through 31 through 40 or thereabouts. As you look at verse 31, it's clear that Jesus is setting up a scene here. He's trying to make us picture something in our mind, and he's setting up kind of a dramatic picture here of the final judgment, and it's our job as the reader to imagine that we're sitting in the throne room of God in the final judgment. And I think that's what Jesus wants us to imagine as we read this. So he's setting the scene here. And it says, "When the Son of Man shall come in his glory, and all the holy angels with him, then shall he sit upon the throne of his glory. And before him shall be gathered all nations, and he shall separate them one from another, as a shepherd divideth his sheep from the goats. And he shall set the sheep on the right hand, but the goats on the left. Then shall the king say unto them on his right hand, Come, blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. Now, pausing right there, the scene has been set here, and now we're getting to the conclusion here. And I can imagine that his audience was kind of leaning forward at this point to hear what was going to divide the evil sinners, the goats, from the righteous, from the sheep. Probably everybody already had something in their mind about what was the dividing line between the evil people and the good people. And I can imagine that most of the people were not expecting the next words. And I think that we have read this from childhood, and so it's just hard to imagine this is a radical saying anymore. But for the people hearing this for the first time, I doubt Jesus' next words were what they were expecting. For I was an hunger, and you gave me meat. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you took me in. Naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came unto me. Then shall the righteous answer, saying, Lord, when saw we thee an hungered and fed thee, or thirsty and gave thee drink? When saw we thee a stranger and took thee in, or naked and clothed thee? Or when saw we thee sick or in prison and came unto me? And the king shall answer and say unto them, Verily I say unto you, inasmuch as ye have done it unto one of the least of these my brethren, ye have done it unto me. And again, it's easy for us to, having read this, we just kind of might take it for granted, but these are some strong words here, and probably not what the Pharisees that were listening to this would have expected. They were probably thinking about, well, I'm sure it was by how well they kept the laws and the commandments that was going to divide the evil people from the good people. But instead, Jesus looks at how we served other people. That was the criteria. And again, just because he didn't mention other criteria like, say, immorality or things, does not mean that those things are approved in any way. But what Jesus was pointing out here is all acts of service that we did, and often without really knowing who we were doing it for, but Jesus said, you did it unto me. I mean, it's the same theme that we see over and over in the Old Testament, and we just read this morning in our verses, that Israel was judged by how they treated others, by how they treated the poor and the stranger in their land. And Amos, just one example, Amos 2, 6-8, I'll just read that here rather than turn to it. But thus says the Lord, for 3 transgressions of Israel, and for 4, I will not revoke the punishment, because they sell the righteous for silver and the needy for a pair of sandals, those who trample the heads of the poor into the dust of the earth and turn aside the way of the afflicted. And that's some pretty graphic words there, where he says those who trample the head of the poor into the dust of the earth. And Jesus said, because you have treated the people this way, that's why you're going to be judged for not treating them the way you should have, for injustice to the poor and needy. So in these verses, Jesus is warning those who are listening that in the new kingdom, here in Matthew, the new kingdom that he's ushering in is going to be no different. We see 4 areas of needs in these verses, and I would say there are physical needs, food and water, material needs, which is represented by clothing, hospitality, where we're bringing people in, and then also a visitation where we're going out to people. I mean, I think you can see those 4 aspects brought out in these verses. And some of us may be gifted differently, that one of these is our unique strength. But in every area of these, I think every Christian can be in some kind of service, whether it's in meeting physical needs or hospitality or visitation. And I think about the physical needs, the giving of food and healing. In our country, we often think that there's very little hunger. We think of hunger as something out in other countries, in Africa or somewhere like that. But there's often are people around us that are struggling with that we may not be aware of. It's often a hidden thing. And because we're not connecting to those who struggle or to get enough to eat, and it's often the children that are the ones that are struggling with that, and we don't really see that happening. But in poor or broken home situations, that can be happening. It can also be where people don't have enough food because of pride. Often you'll see this more with refugee families, where they have a strong sense of pride, and they aren't willing to ask somebody for food because they don't want to put themselves in that position. So we can serve by providing food to those who are in need. This can be in the form of gifts to show our concern to somebody as well. A get well to a neighbor means a lot more when it comes with a plate of cookies versus just having a card. It says something that you care for them beyond just words. It's a physical act of giving them something. Helping to serve meals in a homeless shelter is another way we can do that. Packing at Christian Aid Ministries or Blessing of Hope is another way, and not just because you get the cheap groceries as well. It's because we actually care about providing something for the people that we're helping in those cases. There's many others. I won't try to list them all, but helping out people with physical needs, baby meals are another way that we do that here at church, and when somebody's sick. So there's lots of ways that we practice that. It also talks about the sick. Some of us are much more trained to do this than others, and it requires a certain amount of training. And so that's a unique gift that some people have that others don't as much. But I was just one example of that. I get weekly reports from the medical staff in Bangladesh at the there's a refugee camp there for the Rohingya people that have been driven out of Myanmar, and now there's a giant refugee camp there, and there's quite a few Anabaptists over there that are helping out with the medical clinic. And just one of the last things one of the nurses said that she said is, it is always a highlight to see people improving. She had a picture of a baby that looked good. This baby came first to our clinic last month at 9 months of age, weighing 10 pounds. He was obviously malnourished and lethargic. We started him on infant formula, and within the past 2 weeks he has gained a pound, and he was so playful and active at his last visit, it delighted my heart. And so those are just interesting little tidbits that they send over about the different ways that they're helping out people, and it's always encouraging to see that there's people from among us that are going out and using their medical expertise to help people that are really seriously in need of medical assistance. And that can also be acts of service in our local community by helping out with EMS and fire and things like that as well. So material needs are another one, and again, that can be many different things. A lot of us have a lot of material possessions. It talks about clothing, but I think it goes way beyond that. It's not just that we need to give people clothing that don't have clothing, but it goes beyond that. It's about using our material resources to serve other people, and that is often involved. It means that we're going to help other people with work. A lot of us have skills that we can use to help other people, and so helping an elderly neighbor with chores or home improvement projects, mowing the lawn or putting out the trash for them, offering to help with some weekend fix-it projects, whatever it is. There's many different things that we can do to help out the people around us by meeting their material needs or helping them out with work. Another one is volunteering for disaster relief, going out to places around us that have been hit by tornadoes or hurricanes or whatever, and helping out to rebuild in those situations is another very clear act of service and shows that we are practicing that to the people around us. The third one is hospitality, and I won't say a whole lot about this, but inviting people in to our homes. Christian service is often practiced in hospitality, and so this means we don't even need to leave our own homes. We can just make our homes places where people feel welcome, and that's an act of service as well, whether it's neighborhood children, lonely people, the needy, or other people that we can serve. We can use our homes as a place to show God's love to other people. And again, it carries with it a certain amount of risk, and sometimes we need to be willing to take some risk to do those places that we don't necessarily just pull somebody off the street and bring them into your house every time, but after you develop a relationship, I think there's a certain amount of trust there that we build up, and we can use our homes as a place where people can feel welcome and we can be a witness to them. And then fourthly, visitation, going to visit those in places of need, whether that's the hospital, in prison, or in other people's homes. This is a very clear biblical command that's repeated multiple times. And it also, maybe I should point out too, that these verses are not, these things are not just for ministers. They're for every person that claims to be a Christian. And so I don't don't think that it's just the ministry that needs to go visit people. This applies to us as ministry. It also applies to every person here that is claiming to be a Christian, is that we need to be people that are going out and trying to live this out by visiting people in time of need. And so, how are we doing in this area as far as visitation? One question that might come up is visiting your family and friends an act of service? And I think that the answer to that is no. When I visit my family and friends, it's because I'm doing it basically for my own benefit because I enjoy it. It's not the same thing. And sometimes we need to be willing to give up some of that visitation to free up time to visit the people that really need it. I think that's a certain comfort that we have. We have lots of connections, we have lots of family, we have lots of friends, and we can spend about all our social time doing that, and suddenly we don't have time to visit somebody in the hospital, or we're so busy that we don't even think about going out and meet it, and somebody has a hospital visit, we don't even think about it because we're so busy doing other things. And I say that to myself, first of all, that it's often easy to miss visitation because there's so many other things we can be doing. But just as a challenge to us as we think about visitation, visiting the elderly, visiting people in need, visiting people in the hospital is greatly appreciated by those who are in those situations. And at some point, we'll be in that situation as well, and we'll also be appreciative of people that took the time to visit us in our time of need. In conclusion, service requires humility, putting down of ourselves, and there is a cost to it. It takes time and it takes energy to do it. And so we're, in a sense, losing that, but yet we weigh that against what we're gaining. So we're losing some of our time, we're losing some of our energy, maybe some of our resources, but Luke 9:24 says, whosoever would save his life will lose it, but whosoever loses his life for my sake will save it. And again, we have that upside down kingdom where, yes, we may be losing something, but what we're gaining by doing it far outweighs the cost on our own end for doing it. And service is really being the hands and feet of Jesus, serving others with our time, our talents, and our treasures. And more than just giving money to a good cause, it's actually stepping out into the work and doing it, spending time helping people that are in time of needs. And it's really the way that we are truly serving as disciples of Christ when we go out and serve other people. And I think I'll just close with 1 Peter 4:8-10 as we think about how this, in 1 Peter is talking about how we practice this. And it says, above all things have fervent charity. In other words, above all, love each other deeply, because have fervent charity among yourselves, for charity shall cover the multitude of sins. Use hospitality one to another without grudging. As every man hath received the gift, even so minister the same one to another, as good stewards of the manifold grace of God. And so that's the challenge I'd like to leave with us this morning as we think about being disciples of Christ, is how am I being a good steward with what God has given me by reaching out to other people in acts of service, whatever God lays on our heart. So this time, why don't we kneel for a word of prayer.